Andy Griffith. He was a small-town sheriff of Mayberry. He is dead, apparently at age 86.
249 episodes, 8 seasons, never once outside the top 10. Andy Griffith didn't just star in one of the most beloved programs in television history. He helped build it, shaped it, and defined it episode by episode for 8 straight seasons. For more than half a century, he remained one of the most recognizable and trusted faces in American entertainment. To millions of people, Andy Griffith became a symbol of comfort, safety, and small-town warmth. But on July 3, 2012, something unexpected happened. Andy Griffith died at 7 o'clock in the morning, and by 11:30 that same day, he had already been buried. No funeral, no public service, no final goodbye. So why was one of the most iconic television stars in American history buried before much of the world even knew he had died? This is the story behind Andy Griffith's sudden burial. Let's get into it. The man behind the sheriff. Andy Samuel Griffith was born in 1926 in Mount Airy, North Carolina, a small mill town tucked into the Blue Ridge foothills. His father was a factory carpenter. They lived in a 2-room house. Andy was an only child, and by his own account, performing became the one thing that made people pay attention to him. Church plays, the school choir, local talent shows. He wasn't naturally confident. He was driven by something closer to desperation. The need to be seen, the fear of going unnoticed. People who knew him early on often described him as intense beneath the humor, friendly and charismatic, but also deeply ambitious and surprisingly guarded. He got a music degree from the University of North Carolina, became a school teacher for a brief stretch, then started performing a comedic monologue called "What It Was Football." A country boy's baffled description of a football game that became a regional sensation and eventually a genuine hit record. By the late 1950s, Hollywood had taken notice. His 1957 film, A Face in the Crowd, is still one of the most unsettling performances in American cinema. Griffith playing a manipulative drifter who seduces the country with his folksy charm and rises to dangerous political power. Critics were stunned. Nobody expected that kind of darkness from a man with that kind of smile. And that contrast between the warmth on the surface and the complexity underneath would define Andy Griffith for the rest of his life. And then in 1960, The Andy Griffith Show debuted on CBS, and it changed American television forever. Mayberry and What It Cost. The show was a phenomenon from the first episode. Andy Griffith played Sheriff Andy Taylor, a father raising his son, Opie, in the fictional town of Mayberry, North Carolina. The Andy Griffith Show ran for 8 seasons, and it never ranked outside the top 10. In its final season, it was the #1 show in America, and Griffith chose to walk away anyway. But behind the warmth on screen, the production was something else entirely. Griffith was not just the star, he was the boss. He controlled the scripts, the tone, and the pace of every episode. By multiple accounts, the pressure of maintaining that control made him brutal to work with. George Lindsay, who played Goober Pyle in The Andy Griffith Show, wrote in his autobiography that Griffith would call cast members every Monday night if he liked their performance. If the phone didn't ring, showing up Tuesday morning felt like walking into a courtroom. That silence mattered because Griffith's approval mattered. People around him wanted to please him, partly because they admired him, and partly because they understood how demanding he could become when things were not perfect. Don Knotts, his best friend and creative partner, the man who won 5 Emmy Awards for Barney Fife, left the show in 1965 after a money dispute. Knotts felt he was paid a fraction of what he deserved and asked to be made a full partner. The request was denied. And although the friendship survived, the chemistry between Andy Taylor and Barney Fife had become the emotional center of the show. After Knotts left, Griffith admitted the show never felt the same again. Ratings remained strong, but something underneath the surface had shifted. The show that looked effortless was built under enormous pressure. But that is not what broke the sheriff of Mayberry. The death he couldn't grieve. In January 1996, Andy Griffith's son Sam was found dead in his North Hollywood apartment. slumped over a desk. He was 38 years old. He had drunk himself to death. Sam had idolized his father and struggled his entire life under the weight of that name. He had a history of legal trouble, a marriage that ended in violence, and years of addiction that neither money nor love could break. When Don Knotts called Andy to offer condolences, all Andy could say was, "It's very, very, very painful." And after that, he rarely spoke of Sam again. What made it worse, and what almost nobody knew at the time, was that Andy couldn't even go to his own son's funeral. His daughter Dixie explained it years later. There would have been too many cameras, too many magazines. The grief would have become content. So he stayed away from the burial of his only son and lived with that absence for the rest of his life. Television's most famous on-screen father could not bury his own child in peace. That loss settled into him and never left. It only reinforced something he had already started to believe, that fame didn't protect you, it ambushed you. It turned your worst moments into headlines and your grief into entertainment. And then, only 10 years later, Andy would suffer another loss, one that he could never really overcome. His closest friend. Jesse Don Knotts and Andy Griffith had been friends since 1955, when they appeared together on Broadway in No Time for Sergeants. When Andy went to Hollywood to film a TV pilot about a small-town sheriff, Don called him up and asked if the sheriff could use a deputy. The rest is television history. Their friendship survived the money dispute. It survived the end of the show. It survived decades of separate careers and everything else life threw at them. By 2005, Don Knotts was dying of lung cancer, and he kept it secret, even from Andy, because a sick actor couldn't get work, and he still wanted to work. When Griffith finally made it to Don's bedside in 2006, he leaned in close and said, "Jess, breathe. You've got to make this. You've got to pull through." Don Knotts died on February 24, 2006. Andy was there. 6 years later, Andy Griffith was gone too. And the man who had stood at his best friend's deathbed had made sure, with meticulous planning, that no camera would ever stand at his. The plan, what happened on July 3, 2012, did not happen by accident. Andy Griffith had arranged it all years in advance. He died at home on Roanoke Island, the North Carolina coastal community where he had lived for decades, at approximately 7 in the morning. His wife Cindy was beside him, and before the news had even fully registered with the public, the burial was already underway. By 11:30 that same morning, he was in the ground. He was laid to rest in the Griffith family cemetery on his own property, not in Hollywood, not in his hometown of Mount Airy, but on the land he had chosen for himself. A small group of local friends attended. The sheriff of Dare County grounded helicopters to keep news crews away from the estate. No public service, no procession, no cameras. His daughter Dixie, his only surviving child, did not make it in time. She had known her father's wishes, and she honored them even at the cost of a final goodbye. "He didn't want a funeral," she said. "He didn't want a circus. He didn't want a media frenzy." The speed of it shocked the public, who assumed it had a right to be there. But Andy Griffith had been watching what fame did to people for a very long time. He had seen it when his son and his best friend died. He had seen it across 50 years of a career that turned every public moment into content. He understood, in a way only someone famous for half a century truly can, that the camera doesn't mourn with you. It waits for the moment your grief becomes a usable image. Andy was a Grammy Award winner, a Television Hall of Fame inductee, the only actor to appear in all 249 episodes of his own show. A man who walked into local stores barefoot and refused, his whole life, to perform the role of celebrity off-camera. That wasn't humility for show. That was who he was and what he believed in. And Andy extended that same instinct to his very last moment, the moment he knew would become the biggest story of the day, and he made sure it belonged to him alone. Mayberry was a place without malice, without chaos, without the kind of pain that doesn't resolve itself by the end of an episode. But the life behind the sheriff's badge was darker than any episode ever showed. So what do you think? Did Andy Griffith's decision to be buried so quickly make perfect sense after everything he experienced in life? Or did fans deserve one final chance to say goodbye? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories like this one.